Very happy to be here to do another interview, this time with Harald Kavli, a good friend of mine from Oslo who leads the Oslo Stoics, I think.
Yeah.
He's a philosophy student at the University of Oslo, and one of the things that particularly caught my eye and I thought might be of interest to everybody is the fact that he has taken on the Herculean labor of translating Epictetus into Norwegian. So that's quite a commitment and investment. I know from having taken on big translation things just how easy it is to take on something that seems quite workable, but then you get into it. So you've got several chapters done already, right? What's your impression of the task so far?
Well, I think it's actually quite doable compared to other Greek texts. So, for instance, I find Epictetus much easier than Plato.
Yeah.
So the language isn't that difficult, but what might be a challenge is to capture the tone of Epictetus. He can be almost vulgar from time to time, and
he's very direct with his interlocutors, the students sometimes, local people, even officials.
Yeah, and especially the chapter on personal,
adornment.
Adornment, yeah.
Yeah, book 3, yeah.
Yeah.
Was it book 3 or book 2? Where the student comes in dressed up too much.
Yeah, it's I think it's book 3.
Okay.
Book 3-1, if I remember correctly. So it tells him to cut off his genitals and hang himself.
Well, and Epictetus often calls people slave, which I guess he's in many respects allowed to do since he was a slave himself.
Yeah, and that's something that A. Long brings up in his book when he talks about freedom being one of the dominant themes in Epictetus. And I guess it makes sense for Epictetus to call his students slaves because they are slaves to their passions and things like that. So.
Yeah, and he has that line too. If you desire something that another has control over, you make yourself a slave to that person.
Yeah.
Which certainly seems to be true. So how did you get interested, first of all, how did you get interested in Stoicism? And then what made you think that it's about time to translate Epictetus' Discourses into not just Norwegian, but the first Scandinavian translation, right?
Yeah, this will be, as far as I know, the first translation in any Scandinavian language of the Discourses. I think the Stoicism in general is having a renaissance now. It seems to be a lot of people who are discussing it now, and it seems to be about time to get a Norwegian translation.
So are there Norwegian or other Scandinavian language translations of Marcus Aurelius or Seneca or any of the other Stoic figures?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether there are any Swedish or Danish translations. I'm pretty sure that there are. There is a Norwegian translation of Marcus Aurelius.
Okay.
From the late 50s, I believe. So that's actually quite good. It's a bit old-fashioned, but it's definitely readable. That's
one of the things we struggle with. The public domain texts in English are always very old-fashioned language. The newer texts, which are, of course, you have to pay for it. With contemporary language, and we almost have too many choices in English between different editions. I don't imagine that's that much of an issue in Norwegian, right?
No. There's only one translation of Marcus Aurelius. There are two translations of the Enchiridion into Norwegian.
Okay.
And one seems to be currently out of print. I can't get it at least. And that's the modern one. And there's also a translation from 1920 or something like that into not my Norwegian but the other Norwegian, which is a bit more tricky to read.
So has there been a very big transformation in the 20th century from Norwegian as you might find it in the 1920s to what would have been spoken around the turn of our century?
Not too much, but there are two official written standards for Norwegian, and one is called bokmål and another is called nynorsk or New Norwegian.
Okay.
So book language and New Norwegian. And,
interesting.
And New Norwegian is based on the dialects on the western coast.
Okay.
So if you go back about 100 years, that written standard is going to be a bit different from what you will read today.
Okay.
But if you read, like let's say Henrik Ibsen or Knut Hamsun, who wrote around late 19th century, that's quite readable today.
Okay. So I imagine that one of the reasons for translating any Stoic text into Norwegian would be that, many people in Scandinavia English is a second language.
Yeah.
I imagine that for some it's not.
To varying degrees. I mean, I think that most Norwegians, and probably almost all Norwegians who are interested in reading philosophy, will be able to read English quite well.
Okay.
The only people who don't speak English are people who are, there aren't many.
Yeah, that's right.
Perhaps a few immigrants, people who come from the third world and
are interested in the process of learning Norwegian as a second language.
Yeah, maybe haven't learned English in their home country and something like that.
So what is I know there's definitely some personal reasons, and there's things that you learn along the way in translating, but then what is the impetus for providing a Norwegian translation? Is it just to be able to do it, or
yeah,
sort of like climbing Mount Everest?
Yeah, a bit, and also it will help me. Yeah.
We're good.
Very quiet in the building.
We couldn't find any, so we're just already in process. So it's perfectly fine. Thanks. Go ahead.
And also it will improve my Greek, so it's a great way to actually learn Greek.
Yeah.
And I hope to be able to use this for a master thesis or something like that. So
that's a great idea. Yeah, that's a good project, because then you can translate it, write a commentary.
And get my MA. So
I think a lot of my viewers won't know about this, but that's kind of a common process both in classics and in philosophy. And I suppose too, if you're doing ancient history or literature, instead of writing a dissertation where you're saying, I'm going to unpack the concept of freedom in Epictetus, blah, 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 you actually translate a previously untranslated text or provide a new translation, and then the commentary says why one made the choices as a translator here and there to render things this way rather than this way. And with Epictetus, so that's actually a good lead into a question. With Epictetus, there's a number of Greek terms that we've talked about that are somewhat difficult to translate well into English, and I'm wondering if the same issues arise with respect to Scandinavian languages, for like, say, proirasis.
The pre-gripping. I'm not really sure if there is a good Norwegian translation, but...
So, I don't know Scandinavian languages, but I know German, and I know that it's very easy to go to the roots and just cram a bunch of words together. Is that an available technique, you could say, for rendering things? So like preference, like proirasis, if we think about it in terms of preference, well, in German you can just say, vornehmen, right?
Yeah.
And it's really the same cognates all thrown together. Can you do that in Norwegian then?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Something like prolepsis, preconception. You can probably say something like forståelse or something like that in Norwegian. So there's a bunch of options there.
Now, does that strike you as a good choice for translations, or is it better to come up with a new term?
Well, I think it sounds a bit odd, so I'll probably try to come up with a new term.
Yeah.
But I think I'll have to write a list of the terms at the beginning.
Or a glossary.
Yeah, glossary.
Yeah.
And perhaps even keep a lot of the terms in Greek, depending on how many there are.
Yeah. There's quite a few technical.
Yeah, something like eudaimonia, for instance.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. No, the standard translation for happiness in Norwegian would be lykke, and that sort of just means happiness. And it can also be a verb, or lykkes, which means to succeed in something. So that was my professor's translation of it. So then you move the focus away from a mental state and rather to something more objective, that you succeed at what you're supposed to do. So that's one thing.
Yeah. I mean, we struggle to translate it into English, but I sometimes think, they often, because of virtue ethics and its renaissance, want to say, well, let's translate eudaimonia as flourishing.
Yeah.
But that's such an old-fashioned word, too, Maybe fulfillment is something that works better. Yeah. It still has a teleology there. Getting to what you're supposed to be. The only trouble is we've got so much new agey self-help stuff that's all about personal fulfillment that it starts to sound. Now, is that something that you see in Norwegian? Are self-help books as big there as they are here?
Yeah, probably. There are crime fiction cookbooks and self-help books. That tends to be the big groups in the bookstore.
Okay. Yeah, the philosophy section in most, if you go to a university bookstore, of course, it's different, but most American bookstores, there'll be a philosophy section, and only half of the stuff in there is actually philosophy. The rest is all sorts of other things.
And I guess that's a problem for Stoicism too, because it's, I mean, it can be taken to be self-help in some ways.
So you lead a small but growing Stoic community, essentially, through the Stoic Fellowship. Your branch is in Oslo. What are the people who are coming to talk about and study Stoicism in Norway particularly interested in?
Well, we're actually shrinking at the moment, so we're down to 2 or 3 active members. Well, the problem was some people wanted different things, Some were very interested in studying the philosophy in a more academic way. Someone just wanted to do, whatever could make them more virtuous and more happy and that kind of stuff. And some other people are more critical. They wanted to really dig into a few things like, is there such a thing as a human nature and things like that. So
that's a tough set of things to juggle.
Yeah, and also some of the ideas in the zeitgeist. I mean, moral relativism seems to be big these days. Who are you to tell me how I'm supposed to live my life? And that kind of stuff.
We have a bit of that with people who come in to the Milwaukee Stoics, but then they don't stick around.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably what happened to us too.
Yeah.
But also, it is challenging to lead a group. It takes a lot of effort, and I'm not really an expert on the matter yet. So
well, and there's so many challenges that aren't so much of content, but are just managing, scheduling, and getting people. Inevitably, I don't know if it's the same way for you, but anytime we pick a meeting, there's somebody who's like, "Well, that's not a good time for me."
Yeah. Yeah, no, we haven't had that problem. We just set a date and then people come or do not come. I think that's the way to go.
Perhaps Norwegians complain less than Americans do.
That depends. We're mostly easygoing. So that hasn't been a problem.
Yeah. So, what do you think? You're here at Stoicon. What are you most looking forward to? I know you've already had some of that, getting to meet some of the people.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here, and all of a sudden you walk past someone like Christopher Chill or other people you only seen on the internet or read their books, something like that, and that's definitely fun. Yeah. Also a part of the Stoic Fellowship, so one of those committees with great.
Well, that's right. You edit Indifference Quarterly.
Yeah, or I don't edit it. I'm the whip. I'm the one who sends the mails and asks people to edit.
You stay on top of you ride herd, as we say. Right? Are you familiar with that expression?
No.
So it's a cowboy term, right?
Okay.
You get the cows moving. Riding herd means you're prodding them along.
Yeah, that's my job. So I don't do a whole lot. I just send a few mails and things like that. Yeah. So that's another thing. It's great to meet a few of those people. I think I saw either James or Nick.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, Dan Lambert.
Some of the founders of the
Yeah.
Stoic Fellowship. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think at least one of them is going to be here.
Yeah, I think it was Dan. I saw Dan
Well,
Lambert.
Dan is very active with the Orlando Stoics, so that's quite good.
Yeah.
They seem to be a very active chapter compared to some of the others.
Yeah, and I get to meet you. I mean, I only talked to you through Skype. And
that's right, yeah. Yeah, so we're familiar with each other, but it's so different in the electronic medium where you can only see, a certain amount of the person.
Yeah, but you can't.
And that's if it's not glitching.
Yeah, that's an occasional problem. Yeah, there can be a lot of glitching on Skype.
Yeah. They're using that, this is a bit of off topic, but they're using that as a means to connect up Stoic communities, in other places. So the Australia Stoicon X, each year they've shown a video of somebody, and then they have them Skype in and answer questions. And it seems like a really great tool to overcome. I mean, that's some pretty vast distance. We're used to talking across the Atlantic, but when you're talking across the Pacific, that's quite different. So.
Yeah, that's probably true. But back to the text. One line that I really want to get right is in 1:1.
Okay.
So it's one of the most well-known, probably. It's that apophane me dei, eide apophnesko, kalmet oligon, din Aristotes horas elfuses, eitat tote desnexima. So I have to die. If it's now, I will die. But if it's in a little while, I will go and have lunch, since the hour of lunch has come.
Yeah.
And then I will die. So, eitat tote desnexima. That's a future perfect. So, I will achieve deadness or something like that.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. So, it's quite a rare form of the verb.
I have to admit that I'm sort of lazy and spoiled with having lobes. Yeah. So I'll read it in the English most of the time, unless I'm deliberately pushing myself into the Greek. But then as soon as the English starts to seem a little strange, then I go to the Greek and say, well, okay, what's actually being said here? But I never read either one like all the way through in the original language.
No. Do you have any good tips for learning Greek?
No, because the way I learned it was completely idiosyncratic. I took some ancient Greek classes when I was in graduate school, but I'd already learned German and Latin by that time, so I had a strong basis. And I was very interested in comparative Indo-European linguistics. So when I was learning Greek, I didn't do it the way most people do, which is to learn the paradigms and do a lot of drills and practices. I was very interested in it as a linguistic system, and I was interested in what we call synchronic linguistics, where you're looking at it as one big system at one point in time, which is a bit artificial with the classic Greek, because like Epictetus's Greek is changed considerably. It's koine from the Greek of Plato, or even Aristotle is kind of in between. But then there's the diachronic thing, where you're looking at how did things change over time, and because I was so interested in that gave me a leg up that most other students didn't. So I didn't have to actually learn paradigms, because I would learn instead the shifts that took place. Sort of like umlauting in Germanic languages, the vowel shifts that took place in Greek, or the ways things were assimilated. And so then when I took the tests, I could pass on that basis. So it was sort of, in a way, it was sort of like reverse engineering things, and that's not the way people should learn languages, I think. So, I mean, the only other thing I can say is, when you're doing it, you just have to keep working at it day after day after day, and you acquire more and more vocabulary, and you know how it is. Each author has their own peculiar language that they use, so you have to learn their particular glossary. It's not like we're speaking English now, and we're using a pretty standard language, if I introduce some sort of strange terms, which I could do because, my regionalism's coming from Wisconsin. Like if you ask me about the water fountain, I say the bubbler is over there, and you're like, what the hell's a bubbler, right? That would be one thing, but with Plato or Epictetus or any of these ancient authors, it's word after word after word like that. Sometimes some of the words only occur in that author because we've lost so many texts, right?
Yeah, that's true.
That's actually a good question to ask, a very different question. So we only have maybe 3 to 7% of Stoic texts that at one time did exist. What would you want if you could have a Stoic text that we know existed? Which one would you want most to have?
Well, Zeno's Republic seems to be a good choice.
Okay.
On Ends by Chrysippus.
Yeah.
Would be another one. Maybe some text on determinism and ethics.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they wrote any text on that, but
yeah, we get a little glimpse into that through Cicero's On Fate and On Divination, but we don't have any of the original texts. So.
Where does that analogy with the dog chained to the chariot?
That you can either run along with the chariot, or you can get dragged by it.
I think Seneca mentions it.
Who else? Does Cicero mention it? I think there's an oblique reference to it in one of the works, maybe the Tusculan Disputations or On Ends. It's interesting because Augustine references something like that as well when he's talking about Cicero and the Stoics in the City of God.
Okay.
The Christians the early Christians, they had access to these texts.
Yeah.
And some of them were actually very receptive to the Stoics. Clement of Alexandria, for example, really liked them.
Yeah, and I think that the Enchiridion was used in certain monasteries from time to time, and
although they changed the language, so the philosopher becomes the monk.
Yeah, and Socrates becomes Jesus. And things like that. So.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think about that. Well, and they had Seneca, and they had Cicero. They didn't have Marcus Aurelius after that. That was lost, I think, in the 4th or 5th century until the Renaissance.
I think
in the West, at least.
Yeah, in the West. The Norwegian edition of Marcus Aurelius is actually, it starts with a quote from some bishop in Constantinople from the 10th century or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think it was read there at that time.
Yeah, I imagine they wouldn't have ever lost Aurelius, right? Whereas in the West, there were so many things because of the Dark Ages that we did lose. And the monks were the only ones to preserve most of these texts.
Yeah.
I mean, we think about the Renaissance and they rediscovered all these texts. Most of them were rediscovered in monastery libraries, and the monks had just lost track of what they had as holy, or lost interest.
Yeah, I heard a few anecdotes about that. People traveling all across Europe to try to find some sort of manuscript in a monastery far away or something.
Yeah. And there were monasteries built on monasteries. Hildegard of Bingen, who is, in Western Germany, one of the monasteries that she founded was on the ruins of an old Carolingian monastery. So you could imagine that there could have been cases where, although books are pretty prized, but there could have been cases where monasteries actually reincorporated each other's holdings and then just didn't keep good records. Yeah. So, is there anything else that you'd like to bring up in terms of the translation or Stoicism? I always let my interlocutors have the last word.
Yeah, nothing that comes to mind. I think we've been through a lot.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for coming on, and hope that my viewers enjoy hearing about all these efforts at translation, and it really is a major task you're taking on. So
yeah, it will probably take me several years. So there's no reason to call it bookshop just yet. So.
Yeah, we'll certainly put posts about it because I'll do another interview with you when it becomes available.
Yeah,
right. That would be a great thing to do.
Yeah.
So.